Mr. Cooper, you have 6 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Conacher, Mr. Carney's ethics disclosure states that he is entitled to carried interest payments, aka future bonus pay, in respect of the performance of Brookfield's global transition funds, in which he co-led efforts to raise billions of dollars of capital for. But what is missing from Mr. Carney's disclosure are the holdings in this fund, the companies that this fund is invested in. Would you agree that this is a significant and material omission from the standpoint of knowing the extent of Mr. Carney's conflicts of interest?
Yes, and unfortunately, though, the disclosure rules allow for secret investments, essentially. The details are not provided.
Yeah, it's a material omission, would you agree? Because Mr. Carney handpicked the holdings in the companies that the fund is invested in, and therefore the companies his future performance pay worth potentially tens of millions of dollars is tied to, correct?
Yes, so when you have these kind of general funds, which again, it's legal to invest in some of them and keep it secret, some types of mutual funds, the details of what you're actually invested in is known to you, but not disclosed to the public.
So Mr. Carney therefore knows which public policy decisions will impact these holdings, which in turn impacts the future performance of the fund, which in turn affects the value of his future bonus pay. Meanwhile, Canadians are left in the dark. So Mr. Carney, as it pertains to his future bonus pay, is hiding his conflicts of interest from Canadians, isn't he?
Yes, again, that's legal to do, and what's even worse, because of another, the biggest loophole in the Act, he is allowed to participate in decisions 99% of the time that affect his investments, because the definition of private interest in the Act says that you are not in a conflict, and the Act does not apply when you are dealing with a matter that applies generally, and 99% of decisions that Prime Minister and Cabinet Ministers and top government officials make apply generally. And so the Act only applies 1% of the time to very specific decisions. And as a result, it's almost impossible to be in a conflict of interest under this Act.
And I agree with you on that point. But to be clear, just with respect to disclosure, there's nothing that prevents Mr. Carney from disclosing the companies and the holdings of these funds, is there? If he wanted to be transparent, he could simply disclose that information to Canadians?
Of course, you can always go beyond what's required in terms of disclosure and also compliance.
But Mr. Carney, of course, hasn't been transparent. Now, the Global Transition Funds is listed in Mr. Carney's so-called ethics screen, but given that the holdings and the companies that the fund is invested in and in which Mr. Carney's future performance pay is tied to have not been disclosed by Mr. Carney, how possibly can the ethics screen function to screen out Mr. Carney for making decisions where he has conflicts of interest?
Well, the ethics screen never works because, again, of this huge loophole. So ethics screens are a smokescreen that actually violate the law because the Act requires disclosure whenever you recuse yourself, step aside from participating in a decision, discussion, or vote. And the ethics screen allow you to not do that. So you're violating the law, and what's hidden is that, in fact, you're participating 99% of the time in decisions that affect your investments because of this huge loophole, again, that you do not have to step aside when you're dealing with a matter that applies generally. And again, 99% of decisions apply generally. So the screens are a smoke screen that hide conflicts of interest. They do not stop them or prevent them in any way.
And do you have concerns with the fact that this screen is basically set up on the basis of just trust the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and the Clerk of the Privy Council? Just trust them, even though they answer to the Prime Minister, but they serve at the pleasure of the Prime Minister?
Yes, very much so. Anyone who's serving at your pleasure is not independent. And I was very disappointed to hear Ethics Commissioner Conrad von Finkenstein claim that they share the same interest as the Prime Minister in terms of keeping him away from conflicts of interest. Actually, the interest they share with the Prime Minister is covering up conflicts of interest. And these ethics screens, again, were created by the ethics commissioner. It's a loophole that's not in the act. It's created by the commissioner. And tomorrow, Conrad von Finkenstein could require full transparency under that ethics screen of every single time that Mr. Carney is actually stepping aside from a decision. And he could just impose that as part of the conditions of the screen. It's really his screen. He sets the terms of it. And what it would show, if there was transparency, is that 99% of the time, Mr. Carney is participating in decisions that affect his financial interests because the law allows for that, as the ethics commissioner acknowledged when he was testifying.
Now, Mr. Carney has said, well, there's nothing to see here. Everything is on the up and up because I've put my assets into a blind trust. But when we look, for example, at the funds in which he has future bonus pay awaiting for him, what good is a blind trust when the Prime Minister is hardly blind to policy decisions that will impact upon his future bonus pay?
Very, very quick response.
Yeah, blind trusts are not blind at all. You choose the trustee. You also can give them initial instructions. They can give you regular updates, and you know what you put in the blind trust. But even further, for Prime Minister Carney, the holdings are actually outside the blind trust. All the Brookfield conglomerate, the 103 companies, he knows that he owns them. He knows that he owns stock options in Brookfield until 2033. So he knows he's in a financial conflict of interest, and there's nothing preventing or prohibiting or penalizing it.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Church.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Conacher, one of the pillars of my political engagement is to bring ethics into politics and not the other way around. And so I think that we can agree on that. There are a lot of things that I find tiring, and you might agree with me that ethics requires more energy than law. Often we'll say that it's not because it's legal that it's moral. So as members of Parliament, we need to review the Conflict of Interest Act, and this is serious work that needs to be done. Now, the first thing that I find tiring in what the Conflict of Interest Commissioner stated is that he said that we need to support public office holders so that the most qualified are able to work for the public service. I don't think that that's of primary importance. I think that we need to start by defining criteria so that there is no appearance even of conflict of interest, no conflict of interest, because we're talking about people's trust toward public institutions. Now, if somebody coming from the private sector is more competent than somebody who isn't rich, who's not coming from the private sector, I don't think so. I think that that's a posture that shouldn't exist. I think that's quite secondary, and I would like to know what you think of that.
Thank you very much for your question. Yes, really, I would remove the other purposes from the Act because they contradict what the Act is entitled, Conflict of Interest Act. It's supposed to prevent conflicts of interest. And the Supreme Court standard is that they have to be prevented to the point where the public not only perceives that the whole system has integrity, but that it actually has integrity. And if you, as unfortunately the current ethics commissioner and past ethics commissioners, but especially the current ethics commissioner, von Finkenstein, if you focus on facilitating people with big business interests and investments entering public service as really the main focus that he's focused on, and ignore that the purpose of the Act is preventing, prohibiting, and penalizing conflicts of interest, then you're essentially facilitating unethical behavior and that will corrupt policymaking. And so this Act is the Conflict of Interest Act. If it doesn't prevent, prohibit, and penalize conflicts of interest, then just get rid of it. 99% of the time it doesn't do that now. It's pretty much useless. It's a sad joke. Fulfill that purpose first, and if you need to facilitate people getting into business other ways, do it, but never in a way that sacrifices preventing, prohibiting, and penalizing conflicts of interest.
Oui, ça, c'est un aspect.
Yes, that is something that I find tiring. That we're claiming that there are no conflicts of interest when we're talking about a general application. We're talking about Mr. Carney here, but that's just one case among others. This is a never-seen situation. There has never been such a significant case, and I don't want to come back on the examples that have been given, but this is a case that needs to be studied. Do you not think that there are certain profiles that are not compatible with being a prime minister?
Yes, we don't actually know whether we've had a situation like this in the past because there was even more secrecy before. Certainly, Paul Martin owned a shipping company and had many other investments, and we don't know the extent of them. But we do know the extent to some degree in this situation. And when it's the Prime Minister, you have another problem, which is all cabinet ministers and all cabinet appointees and staff serve at the pleasure of the Prime Minister. And so when they have these conflicts of interest, does the cabinet not share those conflicts of interest also? And how do you escape them? Again, that's why the only solution is divestment, actual divestment, not these sham blind trusts that are not blind and ethics smokescreens that just hide conflicts and don't prevent them. And so, for the Prime Minister, it's even more important because of the Prime Minister's power over other public office holders who, again, all serve at the Prime Minister's pleasure.
Il s'agit pas ici.
Here, we're not only focusing on the Prime Minister. He has been elected, but he was elected and in a system where there is legislation with a bunch of loopholes. We don't want this to happen again. There needs to be a choice. Either you become a prime minister or you don't, where you wouldn't find yourself in this situation with conflict of interest. In this case, he has Brookfield, there's C5, and we have to rebuild Canada because of the tariff wars. And once we deal with CUSMA, there's no longer an issue. And so these investments just so happen to benefit him. So the blind trust, he might not know how much he has to gain, but he knows that he will be making gains. So is that screen sufficient? And if not, what would be sufficient? Should there be the commissioner's office that follows up periodically on the way that the two people under Mr. Carney manage that ethical screen?
I mentioned
I need
that,
a quick response, Mr. Conacher,
that
please.
tomorrow the ethics commissioner could say full transparency about how this ethics smokescreen is working. Every time you're stepping aside, you have to disclose it, which is what the Act says and requires. And then get rid of the smokescreen and let's have transparency. What it's going to show is it's going to show that the general application and broad class of persons loopholes mean that Mr. Carney is never stepping aside. He's taking part in all sorts of decisions that affect Brookfield and other companies he's invested in.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Conacher. Merci, Monsieur Thériault. That completes our first round. We're going to go to the second round. I am sticking on time. We're going to start with Mr. Hardy for 5 minutes, followed by Mr. Sarre, but we are going to be on time for each round, each line of questioning. 5 minutes. 5 minutes, Monsieur Hardy.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Conacher, for being with us. 32 years dedicated to ethics. I think that's very honorable. I'll start with my first question. Do you believe that the Prime Minister's investments are causing an ethical problem? I think that I know the answer, but I would like to hear you speak to this ethical issue.
Votre question encore, parce que
Can you please repeat the question?
ne fait pas rien.
My earpiece wasn't working. Do you believe that the Prime Minister is in a clear conflict of interest, whether it be appeared or a real conflict of interest?
Prime Minister, pretty much any time he's making a decision that affects businesses in Canada is in a financial conflict of interest.
Est-ce que vous pensez qu'on a présentement une...
Do you believe that we have a structure in place in order to deal with such a level of a conflict of interest? Do you believe that the Ethics Commissioner is sufficiently equipped to deal with this unforeseen situation?
No, the Ethics Commissioner has recommended expanding the number of secret investments you can have. He views an investment in an ETF, because you don't control it, to not be a financial conflict of interest. Of course it is. Just because you don't control it, you know what it's invested in. An ETF can be industry specific, so can a mutual fund. And he wants to allow those to be invested. He also wants to expand the broad class of persons loophole to match what it is in the MP code. Both of those are going to weaken the Act and make it even more possible to participate in decisions when you have a financial conflict of interest, and to have secret investments that you know about, the public doesn't know about, that cause financial conflicts of interest. And he's saying, oh, when you're making a general decision, you're not in a conflict of interest because it's not about one company. Yes, it is, because it's about your investments, and you could profit from that decision. So his attitude is negligently weak, unfortunately, concerning conflicts of interest, and he enforces the Conflict of Interest Act.
Donc, si on s'en va vers ce thinking-là...
If we use such thinking, then, do you believe that for the first time we are opening the door to interests that are beyond Canadians' interests? People might join politics in order to enrich themselves instead of attracting people who are devoted to Canadians and to the provinces and territories and making things better. Is this a loophole that is being created, a problem created?
And hopefully the committee will look at the entire list of dirty dozen loopholes and close them all, and also strengthen enforcement in key ways. And the penalties. There are 0 penalties. The Ethics Commissioner has recommended a maximum $3,000 fine. That's meaningless to most of these people that the Act covers are making $220,000 plus. A maximum $3,000 fine is not going to discourage anyone.
Je suis content que vous alliez là parce que c'était ma prochaine question.
I'm glad you brought that up because that was my next question. If I am found to be in a conflict of interest, then it's a tap on the wrist, basically. Nothing compared to the money that I would have made. And so do you believe that the legislation needs to be more stringent? For example, if you made money on the backs of Canadians, well, not only will you have to pay that back, but perhaps there should be a percentage applied. But we need to be more strict.
The laws across Canada for parking illegally are more clear and effective, and the fines are higher. And parking illegally almost never causes a problem, except when you're in front of a hydrant and there's a fire, and then your windows get broken by the firefighters. But the laws for parking illegally across Canada are stricter, stronger, and the penalties are higher for violating them than for violating this law, even though it's one of the most important laws protecting democratic government in Canada. That's why I call it a sad joke of a law. And it also doesn't apply 99% of the time. So it's almost impossibly in a conflict of interest, and when you're caught, you get a report saying you're in a conflict of interest. I mean, there has to be a sliding scale of penalties that are mandatory and go up and up as the more power you have to really discourage these violations. But also all the loopholes have to be closed. If apparent conflicts of interest was added to the Act, it would be meaningless because you're still allowed to be in an apparent conflict of interest 99% of the time. So unless you close that general application broad class of persons loopholes, you are doing nothing to change the status quo that allows for unethical, corrupt behavior.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Conacher. Merci, Mr. Hardy. And as a former firefighter, there were lots of times when I wanted to break the glass of cars that were parked in front of a hydro or a water main.